The Best of Our Knowledge explores topics on learning, education, and research. Coming up, the rollout of the free application for federal student aid, or FAFSA, has been rocky this year. We'll dig into how the bumpy rollout could affect colleges and universities. And it's been more than 6 years since the tragic shooting at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School in Florida. We'll speak with Parkland parent and school safety advocate Max Schachter. I'm Lucas Willard, host of The Best of Our Knowledge. You're listening to The Best of Our Knowledge. I'm Lucas Willard. The free application for federal student aid, or FAFSA, is available for students preparing to enter college. The federal government says any student, regardless of income, who wants to be considered for state, federal, and student aid programs, including grants, scholarships, work-study, and loans, should fill out a form. And this year, that form got streamlined, but not without some technical challenges and delays. A vision to improve the lengthy FAFSA application process was championed by former Tennessee U.S. Senator Lamar Alexander, a former U.S. Education Secretary. In the fall of 2020, Alexander said, quote, "The time to finish fixing the FAFSA is now," end quote, and the FAFSA Simplification Act was passed just a few months later as part of a federal budget bill. When the so-called Better FAFSA was soft launched in December 2023, technical issues bugged the application system. Many issues remained in the full rollout in January. Students have until June 30th to complete their application, but some damage may already be done. To learn more about how the challenging FAFSA rollout is impacting colleges and universities, I spoke with Eric Kelderman, a senior writer with the Chronicle of Higher Education.
The rollout was supposed to be finished by the fall of 2022, but the Ed Department knew it wouldn't get there, and so they asked for a year extension. And then in the fall of 2023, also, usually it's people start filling it out in around October. Seniors, in most cases, who are thinking about college for the next fall. And that didn't happen. And in fact, the department wasn't able to really launch the website till the end of December, they called it a soft launch. But even when it went live, there were a lot of problems. People got locked out, or they would fill out the form and get error messages along the way and weren't able to complete it. So lots of problems, certainly in the early going.
Let's rewind. It's January 2024. The new and improved FAFSA is out there, and I'm a student applying for colleges. Maybe I've already been accepted, but I can't get into the portal. There's technical bugs. It's all hung up. How much does that delay then affect the student application process? Did we actually see an effect where students were applying to colleges later because they couldn't get the ball rolling with the FAFSA application?
No, the college application process starts with the application to the college, and then typically you fill it's a little both, I guess, at the same time, right? So as you start applying, you might fill out your FAFSA as you're looking at colleges, right? I don't think the delays weren't really that people weren't applying to college, right? I think the application numbers, from what I've heard, have been robust, right? But the delay is on the back end. So especially when, say, a small private college is trying to build a class, right? They have a certain budget for financial aid that they're going to hand out, right? And they need to know the ability of all the students that they're going to admit, the ability of those students to pay an amount so that they can build a class where, a small number of students are going to pay much more. A whole bunch are going to pay somewhere in the middle, and then there's some students on the end who are going to pay very little, right? Because of maybe they're eligible for Pell Grants, right? And so to make those numbers work, right, colleges need to form a class that's not only sort of diverse in terms of their geographic location, maybe, but their socioeconomic status, right? And that's how they make the budget work. So that, because, for instance, in particular, small private colleges, a lot of the colleges in your neck of the woods, They might discount, in quotes, their sticker price by 50% or more, right? And they're able to do that because, of this sort of bell curve of ability to pay, let's say, right? But they need that information, right? And so if it's delayed, they can't form a class, they can't offer aid packages to most of their students until they have that information. They don't want to promise aid that they can't, more aid than they can deliver, right? So that's sort of the nitty gritty of it.
So, with the FAFSA application not rolling out until January, does that mean that colleges have had, basically all of a sudden a pile of paperwork shows up and they may not have the staff or the resources to sort through it all because there wasn't that head start?
Right. So it's a bigger workload in a more condensed period of time for colleges. And what made it complicated is that in addition to like the information showing up late, much of it had to be reprocessed because of some calculation errors on the department's end. And so yeah, you get a whole bunch of information that you're trying to sort through, and then the department tells you, well, some of that's wrong, and so we have to reprocess it. Or they gave colleges the options of using the the incorrect data if they wanted, but which seems sort of like a no-win scenario for them. So yeah, sort of a double whammy.
What are some of the issues that colleges experienced beyond traffic and technical snafus? Is there anything related to student data, income, other errors that made it through and then basically make it impossible for a college to either dole out aid or for a student to receive aid?
Right. Nothing in that I can think of. Most colleges were fairly cautious in terms of waiting until the information was verified. They don't want to really be caught promising aid that they can't deliver on. They want to make sure that students are eligible for, if they're eligible for sort of federal grants, Pell Grants for low-income students, they want to make sure that that's included. And the department did, the government changed the formula for that. So there are more students that are eligible for Pell now. But really it's about, the real issue is, there's a couple things. Let's back up here a little bit. So one is, the problems caused a lot fewer, at least in theory, caused a lot fewer students to apply through FAFSA. So Education Secretary Miguel Cardona was at the Education Writers Association conference last weekend. He said that right now FAFSA submissions, I believe, or completions are down about 11% compared to the previous year. That doesn't sound like a big number, but 11% fewer students would be a pretty major decline in enrollment for the coming year. So a lot fewer students completing fulfilling FAFSA, filling out the FAFSA, or completing the FAFSA. And then the other big problem is that the longer colleges have to wait to offer aid, it makes it difficult for students to decide either where to go, or more importantly, whether to go at all. So if you're a low-income student, you're sort of on the bubble about going to college, and you don't get that information until, say, usually it's May, right? May 1st is when you usually have to make your decision, right? Or so you would get the aid package actually earlier than that, right? But if you're waiting until June or July and you have to decide, am I going to go to college in the fall, or do I need to get a job now and work because my options are very limited, right? So the question is, even for students who were able to complete the FAFSA, if they have to wait longer on getting that information from colleges, they may decide not to go in the fall. And those are the biggest concerns, right?
With an overall percentage of 11%, are there some states that are far below 11% for students actually filling out the FAFSA information?
Oh, yeah. Let's see. Yeah, in fact, there's a site called the National College Attainment Network, and I'm looking at their data right now. At the bottom end of that is Alabama, where FAFSA completions are off by 22%. So from the previous year. Now that's extraordinary. The smallest difference is in Indiana, where it's just 2% lower than last year.
Does that come down to states' efforts to ensure that students are actually filling out the paperwork?
A number of states are deeply involved in getting students to do that. They have volunteers that go to high schools or um, sometimes colleges set up FAFSA days on their campus where you can go and you can get help at the campus. Some states like Tennessee typically rank towards the top of FAFSA completions every year. Senator Lamar Alexander's home state. They are perennially at the top of FAFSA submissions. So yeah, the state efforts are a big deal.
Now, you write about in West Virginia, Jim Justice, the governor there, declared a state of emergency over the FAFSA and waived the FAFSA requirement for students to receive state aid. What can you tell me about what's going on in West Virginia?
So West Virginia, like a lot of other states, use the FAFSA submissions to determine whether students are eligible for state grants, whether they meet the income requirements, right? So there are merit requirements, right? If you get a grade point average at a certain level, you might get a grant. And then there's need-based grants. And so what West Virginia actually did was to create its own website where students could apply for state aid to sort of get around the FAFSA problem.
Now,
but
go ahead. I'm sorry.
That problem is widespread. It's not just West Virginia where that's an issue, but West Virginia took some extraordinary measures to try and fix the problem.
Now, you briefly touched on it earlier, but when it comes to students actually interested in attending college, is there a downward trend right now in students actually saying, hey, college is the right path for me? Is the confidence that a four-year education will set someone up for a career, is that dipping? And is that a trend that's continuing?
Since the end of the Great Recession, really, since 2011, we've seen a really steady decline in college enrollments, I want to say about 16% over that period nationwide. Mostly at community colleges, especially after COVID, we saw a huge decline in community college enrollment. In part, that's because, with the exception of COVID, the economy's actually been pretty good, right? We've had pretty low unemployment rates for a long time, and that usually means that people are working rather than going to college, especially adult students. And yeah, the polls since 2016 or so have shown a real big decline in the confidence in higher education. So yeah, lots of people being very skeptical about whether the college degree pays off in the long run, and maybe making different choices about what they're going to do.
Do you see a ripple effect from this FAFSA rollout affecting colleges and universities down the line, particularly small colleges and universities? If this trend continues, could it have, if it's not already having a significant impact, could it have a significant impact from this rollout?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think we will almost certainly see some small college closures that are either maybe not directly related to this, but certainly that their decision to close will be hastened by the FAFSA problems. Small colleges are in a really tough spot. The sticker price is a deterrent to folks. The thought of accruing a lot of student aid is a big deterrent. And some of these small colleges don't have a lot of financial aid to hand out. It's not like the elites where if your family earns less than $150,000, you're basically going to college without paying any tuition or fees. So small colleges are in a real bind here, and a couple of dozen students for some of these institutions is the difference. It's very small numbers when you get down below, say, 1,000 students or so. A very small change in your enrollment can have a very detrimental effect on your budget.
So, Eric, as we approach the end of June, do you think that there will be a last-minute bump in FAFSA applications of students actually going online and filling out their forms, especially with the new simplified form, if a lot of the technical bugs that plagued the system in the early days in January have been ironed out by now?
The completion numbers have been going up quite steadily. And so, that 11% figure I cited earlier, that's bound to go down, certainly. Over time. The question for many colleges now is what's called sort of melt. So say you're a student that applied to I don't know, 5, 6 colleges, right? Students often apply to many more than that now, but say you got an aid offer from, sort of non-selective college X, right? And that's sort of your backup, right? But then later in the summer, after you've already committed to non-selective college X, selective college Y comes along and says, "Oh, we can give you a whole bunch more aid, and we're more prestigious. We have a better reputation." There's a lot of concern that students are going to be making choices to switch later in the summer, which kind of throws everybody, more uncertainty into the system.
Eric, is there anything else that you're keeping an eye on as it relates to FAFSA?
The department is already, talking about sort of next year, which is good that they're talking about that. I think there are concerns that we are still not going to have a system that's fully ready to go by October of 2024. So another year. Now, a lot of colleges have sort of mitigated this in terms of like, I've talked to college leaders CFOs who have come up with sort of their own, not CFOs, but financial aid officers who have come up with their own formulas for doling out aid. And so, colleges are looking at workarounds, looking at ways that they can keep colleges students engaged and ready to enroll in the fall.
Eric Kelderman is a senior writer with the Chronicle of Higher Education. You're listening to The Best of Our Knowledge. I'm Lucas Willard. The Parkland, Florida shooting at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School killed 17 people. Parkland parent Max Schachter lost his son Alex in the shooting. Since 2018, Schachter has advocated for school safety in Florida and across the country. His nonprofit, Safe Schools for Alex, provides resources and best practices for school districts, parents, and law enforcement. Recently, Questar 3 BOCES hosted a day-long school safety seminar for educators and administrators in Troy, New York, where Schachter was invited to speak. I spoke with Schachter about his advocacy and how his life changed since the Parkland shooting on February 14th, 2018.
I had a small insurance company before this, but I left that former life, and this is my new life. I'm a national school safety advocate. I travel around the country speaking about school safety and assisting school districts and law enforcement in states to implement common sense school safety legislation.
What can you tell me about the approach different states are taking? There's must be a patchwork of legislation out there,
Yeah.
policies that are on the books.
Yeah.
Is that frustrating? And
Of
it must
course.
be a constant challenge.
Of course, it's hard. Everybody's doing things differently, but these state legislatures, they're dealing with so many different issues. So it's important that I get in front of them to talk about this issue and explain to them what happened in Parkland. Explain to them that if it hasn't happened in your community, you're just lucky. And then the next school mass murderer is already out there. The next gun that he's going to use is already out there.
You have a call for a holistic approach to addressing
Yeah.
school violence, and there's been a lot of disagreement on both sides when it comes to guns, or maybe the focus should be mental health. What's your approach? Is it kind of an all of the above, or how do you?
There's no one panacea. There's no one thing that you're going to do that you're going to say, oh, there's no more violence in this school, or there will be no more violence. It's all about culture, and it's about making sure that the leaders prioritize this issue above all else.
Can you tell me about the school safety dashboard?
Yeah.
And the data that is collected on whether it's incidences of bullying or classroom behavior or instances of violence? What can you tell me about the dashboard, and how did that come about?
Safe Schools for Alex's initiative is to create school safety dashboards in every state and provide information to parents and schools about what's happening inside their classroom. When I dropped Alex off at school, I had no idea what was happening inside his classroom. So they have a right to know what's happening. They want to know, and it's important for schools to have this information as well. They know what's happening in their school, but it's difficult to really understand that data if you're not looking at it in the larger context. So we can't manage what we don't measure, and it's important to have accurate data so that we can make schools safer, so that schools can address the issues that are happening on campus.
With some of the other policies that have been implemented with the state of Florida, what can you tell me about the task force that you were a part of in developing legislation in school safety, and what do you think can be most easily replicated in other states? What can other states do right now to take action?
So there's a lot. We have mandates that there has to be a director of school safety in every school district. There has to be a mental health coordinator in every school district. We just passed a bill that teachers have to teach with a locked door. We have a statewide see something, say something app. We have a law that every teacher has to have a panic app so that if there's an emergency, they hit this button and seconds save lives. We have, the best tool we have to prevent targeted violence is behavioral threat management teams. And so, Florida has a great model. We just launched it, and New York doesn't have to reinvent the wheel. We are already training states on how to implement, an effective threat management model so that, you can identify concerning behavior ahead of time and get these individuals off their pathway to violence and reduce violence in school.
Of course, a lot of that comes down to funding, too, and not as many states have the resources as larger states like New York and Florida. So what can be done at the federal level to ensure that schools have the resources they need to implement safety plans?
Well, obviously the federal government needs to increase funding for school safety and make sure they don't cut the funding. And then we need to pass, common sense school safety legislation like the Eagles Act, which pluses up the funding for the U.S. Secret Service National Threat Assessment Center. The Eagles Act was named after the Parkland school mascot, and the National Threat Assessment Center is a branch of the U.S. Secret Service that focuses on making schools safer. And they help schools, they train school districts and law enforcement on how to establish a threat management unit.
What can you tell me about your coordination and your work with the other families? I mean, you're an outspoken advocate and you've been traveling around the country for years now, but I'm imagining that some of the families involved who lost their children are not quite as vocal. But do you still share a lot of support?
Absolutely. We're close with all the families. And, we find comfort in being with them. And, we're all in a club that nobody ever wants to be in, and they know what I'm going through as I do them. So, absolutely, I'm close with them, and even though some are not as vocal as others, we're all in this together.
And do you have any message for anybody who is maybe sending their child to school next year? They have a young child who's beginning nursery school. A lot of people are worried about this as they sort of take the next steps in parenthood and life, and afraid of things that have happened, including to your own family. What do you say to young parents who are ready to send their children to school?
Number one, I would go to safeschools4alex.org and look up. We have the top 10 school safety best practices for parents. So they need to become educated on what schools should be doing to make them safer, so that they can have these conversations, with administration. They should go to schoolsafety.gov, which is the federal school safety clearinghouse that was formed after Parkland, and there are best practices on that website as well. And then they can also reach out to me personally from our website, safeschools4alex.org.
Max, thanks for taking the time.
Absolutely.
I appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you.
Max Schachter is a national school safety advocate. His son Alex was killed in the Parkland, Florida school shooting at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School in 2018. This is The Best of Our Knowledge. I'm Lucas Willard. According to the trucking industry, there's a national shortage of drivers. Now, a push is on in New York to get high school students behind the wheel. I drove to a nearby school to learn more. It's career day at Tamarack High School in Brunswick. Inside a bright green and black trailer in the school parking lot, Steve Babarakis of the Trucking Association of New York is showing student Mike Plant how to pilot a truck driving simulator.
So go right through this intersection, well, stop, and then go straight through the intersection. And then do you see the yellow arrow sign up there?
Yep.
Plant, who is graduating this spring, sits in a full-size driver's seat, complete with a seatbelt, surrounded by mounted video screens. He turns a wheel to drive the virtual truck down a simulated city street.
I was definitely nervous at first, but once I figured out the weight and pressure of the steering wheel, I was able to time it up pretty good, especially on the wide turns.
Plant wants to go to college to study mechanical engineering and play lacrosse, but he's curious about trucking too.
Trucks are awesome. I see all sorts of videos and movies that truck driving, and who knows, maybe I'll start a trucking business.
And you'll see that green light goes on, so
Yeah.
you can turn the key again and it'll start right up. Okay.
Emmeline Martin, a Tamarack junior, also gets a crash
Right
course.
now, yep.
Oh my gosh.
And keep cutting it, and cut back. Very good.
Oh my gosh, I didn't hit the curb.
No, you did a great job.
This is better than when I got my permit.
Martin drives through a defensive driving scenario. 3D vehicles pass through a virtual intersection before Martin takes a turn.
It's insane. It's definitely way harder than driving a car. You really got to put the work into turning it.
Like Plant, Martin also plans to go to college. As for getting a CDL, that's a TBD.
Right now, I have my mindset of being a special education teacher, but I also was looking into the trades for something during the summertime and time off in case education is not what I want to do once I get there.
It's the first time the Trucking Association of New York has brought this simulator to a high school. Kendra Hems, the association's president, says the push to get young people into trucking comes as the nation faces a shortage of drivers.
It's important because we are losing drivers to retirement. We had a lot of drivers leave the industry during COVID. And right now, nationwide, we're facing a shortage of about 65,000 drivers.
The outreach to high schoolers also comes after a change in New York state law allowing drivers to get their commercial license at 18.
Since prior to that, you had to be 21. So this has now given us the opportunity to come to high schools and say, you can do this now. You no longer have to wait until you're 21 years of age. You can start the process. You can go to driving school. You can get your CDL and you have a career.
Reporting for the Best of Our Knowledge, I'm Lucas Willard. If you'd like to tell the best of our knowledge what you think, send us an email at knowledge@wamc.org. You can listen to the Best of Our Knowledge anytime as a podcast, downloadable wherever you get your podcasts. If you want to catch up on past episodes or hear more WAMC National Productions programs on the news, academic study, books, women's issues, the media, and the environment, visit WAMCpodcasts.org. This has been The Best of Our Knowledge, episode 1759. The Best of Our Knowledge is a national production of WAMC Northeast Public Radio. Thanks to associate producer Jody Cowan. The latest on all National Productions programs is available via the Airwaves newsletter and our flagship station's website, WAMC.org. Until next time, I'm Lucas Willard.